Chapter 1. When the heavens shattered the observation decks of the core world. Alliance were built for elegance, not endurance. Made of spun glass and light-sculpted alloys, they looked out over the quiet dark of the frontier. The polished surfaces reflected the pale violet glow of the distant nebula, the Veil of Sighs, a breathtaking expanse of ionized gas that marked the edge of the civilized galaxy. It was a vista designed to inspire awe, a constant reminder of the vastness of the universe and the Alliance's place within it, a position of careful, measured ascendancy. The diplomats inside them were calm. They belonged to species that had measured their ascendancy in millennia. The krill, segmented and chitinous, valued stability above all else, their society a rigid, mathematically precise hierarchy. The Sylvani, arboreal beings with skin like polished jade, understood the slow, deliberate rhythm of ecological cycles, their politics built on consensus and centuries-long deliberation. The Chromatians, gaseous entities contained within shimmering, iridescent shells, existed primarily as abstract concepts of data and probability, their diplomacy a complex dance of calculated risks and predictive analysis. They all understood the physics of the universe, the mathematical certainty of kinetic energy, and the immutable laws of naval warfare. They were, in short, creatures of measured power, comfortable in the slow, deliberate currents of galactic politics. They'd built empires on strategic alliances, technological dominance, and the careful accumulation of resources, a process spanning epochs. They weren't prone to impulsive action or desperate gambits. They built their power on knowing things. Then, the Voidborn arrived. They didn't jump into the system using hyperlanes or grav-anchors. They simply tore through. Their dreadnoughts were not sleek needles of chrome like the Alliance fleets. They were brutalist blocks of dark, dense iron ore and exposed reactor shielding, looking less like ships and more like weaponized asteroids dragged kicking and screaming into the light. Their surfaces were scarred with what appeared to be ancient, self-inflicted damage, hinting at a brutal, chaotic history. They moved with an unsettling, almost organic rhythm, a disconcerting grace for vessels of such immense scale. Unidentified vessels approaching. Bearing 273, Mark 12. Range fluctuating. Initial energy signatures anomalous. A krill sensor operator's monotone voice crackled over the comms. The krill were rarely flustered, but the sheer wrongness of the readings was disturbing. The Alliance High Command, based on the core world of Viridia, reacted with a studied restraint. A central control room dominated by holographic displays pulsed with activity, a hive of analysts and tactical specialists, all meticulously monitoring the unfolding situation. Grand Arbiter Vaelen, a veteran of 100 strategic crises, a being of cold logic, encased in a polished, multi-jointed carapace, stood at the central console, his mandibles clicking with clinical detachment. He wasn't shouting, wasn't ordering immediate evacuations yet. Confirm visual contact. Engage long-range scanners. Prioritize energy signature analysis, Vaelen commanded, his voice a carefully modulated drone. I want a full spectral breakdown. Determine composition, shielding levels, and weapon systems. And tell me, for the last time, why the damn scouts didn't report this. Sir, the sensors are registering an impossible energy density. It's not adhering to any known physics model. An aide, the scales on his neck flaring with a sudden, erratic shimmer, a sign of extreme data overload, interrupted. Their shields are absorbing kinetic energy. It's baffling. The Voidborn transmission broadcast on all frequencies, a cold, synthesized hum that seemed to vibrate through the very metal of the observation deck. Your resource reserves are requisitioned. Disarm or be reduced. The message was delivered in a language stripped of inflection, devoid of emotion. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of undeniable fact. The Alliance High Command didn't panic. They calculated. The enemy fleet, A cluster of 7 dreadnoughts of terrifying proportions outgunned them 3-to-1 in raw mass, and their plasma arrays generated heat signatures that should have melted their own hulls. By every metric of modern galactic warfare, a direct engagement was suicide. "Order the retreat to the inner sector," Vaelen commanded, his mandibles clicking with clinical detachment. "We will sacrifice the outer colonies to preserve the core. It is the only logical calculus." A slow, precise, and utterly devastating decision. "Sir," an aide interrupted, the scales on his neck flaring with a sudden, erratic shimmer. "The Third Fleet segment isn't retreating. They're burning thrusters. Full acceleration toward the void-born vanguard." Vaelen frowned, leaning over the holographic tactical display. A single icon, small, jagged, and entirely detached from the elegant geometry of the retreating Alliance formations, was charging directly into the maw of the enemy line. It was the Indomitable, a human auxiliary dreadnought, a ship that, frankly, had been relegated to glorified patrol duty in the outer sectors. "Identify that vessel," Vaelen demanded. "Did their navigation AI fracture?" "It's not an AI-driven ship, Arbiter. It's a human auxiliary," the aide swallowed hard. "The human auxiliary.I. Humans were a late addition to the Alliance, classified as a Tier 2 Kinetic Specialist species. They hadn't discovered the grand, elegant truths of zero-point energy or hard-light shielding. They were tolerated because they built sturdy hulls and didn't complain about gravity variances. They were considered primitives playing with fire. They were expendable. The air in the Indomitable's bridge was thick with the acrid tang of burning coolant, and the low, guttural hum of stressed metal. Captain Marcus Vance didn't flinch. Had spent the last 30 minutes staring at the carnage, the splintered remains of the void-born flagship, a grotesque monument to their audacious, utterly illogical attack, and the panicked, disorganized retreat of the remaining enemy vessels. His face, etched with a grim determination, was illuminated by the flickering emergency lights, painting him a silhouette of hardened steel. "Report," he barked, his voice roughened by the intense exertion and the sheer disbelief of the situation. "Shields are down, Captain," the tactical officer, Lieutenant Alara Reyes, reported, her fingers flying across the damaged console. "Hull integrity at 42%. We've sustained significant breaches across decks 3 through 6. Life support is cycling emergency reserves, but the atmospheric integrity is compromised. We're losing breathable air fast. Any sign of further attack?" Vance asked, his gaze sweeping across the holographic display, analyzing the chaotic swarm of enemy vessels. "Negative, Captain. They're pulling back. Full reverse thrust. But their formations are collapsing. It's like they don't understand why they're running." Reyes' voice held a note of bewildered awe. "They're just backing away." Vance gripped the command console, the cool metal a grounding presence against the mounting chaos. He understood that the Voidborn weren't driven by strategic calculations or tactical acumen. They were reacting to something primal, something utterly alien to their meticulously engineered combat doctrine. "Damage report. Engineering," he ordered, turning to Chief Engineer Silas Thorne, a veteran of countless skirmishes and a man who seemed to be built of gears and stubborn resilience. "The core is stable, Captain. For now." Thorne's voice crackled over the comms, strained but resolute. "We've rerouted power from auxiliary systems to stabilize the reactors, but they're pushing the limits. The heat exchangers are failing, and the magnetic containment field is fluctuating wildly. We're bleeding power every second." He paused, a grunt of effort audible. "We've got maybe 30 minutes of sustained output before we're looking at a full-blown meltdown." 30 minutes, Vance repeated, the weight of those words settling on him. "Reyes, calculate our trajectory. We're not retreating. We're going to meet them." "Sir, with our current condition, even a slight course correction would result in a catastrophic collision with the outer colonies. We're essentially a kamikaze ship." "Then let's be the most magnificent kamikaze ship the galaxy has ever seen," Vance replied, a grim smile playing on his lips. Set course for the vanguard. Full power to the sublight drives. Overwrite the safety limits. The bridge erupted in a coordinated flurry of commands. The Indomitable, a wounded beast, began to shudder, its remaining systems straining against the impossible demand. The flickering emergency lights intensified, casting long, distorted shadows across the bridge. The air grew colder, denser, laced with the scent of burning metal. As the ship accelerated, the void-born vessels, a chaotic, swirling mass of dark iron and lethal energy, began to react. The initial panic had subsided, replaced by a chilling, almost unnerving calm. They didn't try to intercept, to flank, or to engage. They simply watched. They're not firing, Reyes observed, her voice laced with disbelief. They're not doing anything. They're just observing us. Suddenly, a new transmission blared across the comms, not the cold, synthesized hum of the Voidborn, but a raw, guttural shout, translated instantly by the Alliance's universal translator. It was a single, archaic word, spoken in a language that hadn't been used for millennia, a language whispered about in legends and dismissed as myth. Karzak! The translation echoed through the bridge, a seismic tremor in the very fabric of reality. It was the word of a dead god, a primal, terrifying utterance that seemed to vibrate within the core of the Indomitable's hull. What the hell is that? Vance demanded, his face grim. I don't know, Captain, Reyes replied, her eyes wide with terror. But I think we've just awakened something. The Voidborn vanguard shifted. Not in a coordinated maneuver, but as if responding to an instinctual, irresistible command. They began to advance, not with aggression, but with a slow, deliberate pace, their massive dreadnoughts closing in on the Indomitable. The air crackled with raw, untamed power. Vance tightened his grip on the command console, his eyes fixed on the approaching enemy fleet. He didn't understand the Voidborn's motivations. He didn't understand the language of the dead god. But he understood one thing: they were about to find out just how relentlessly, how brutally, humanity could fight, fueled by desperation, by a stubborn refusal to surrender, and a terrifying understanding of the true weight of iron. The advance of the Voidborn dreadnoughts was unsettlingly methodical, less a charge, and more a slow, deliberate consumption of space. They moved with a silent, grinding efficiency, their immense forms eclipsing the starlight, casting the battleground into an oppressive, bruised twilight. The initial wave of plasma fire, initially a desperate, chaotic hail, had been replaced by a chillingly precise barrage. Each shot, no longer a weapon of indiscriminate destruction, was aimed with unnerving accuracy at the Indomitable's weakened hull sections. Shields at 20%, Captain, Reyes reported, her voice strained. They're bypassing the active fields with energy pulses weak, but persistent. Vance ignored the rising tide of panic in the bridge. He ran a diagnostic sweep, feeding every bit of sensor data into the archaic computational core of the Indomitable. The results were baffling. The Voidborn ships weren't exhibiting any discernible tactical patterns, no attempts to flank, no feigned retreats. They were simply pressing, like an inexorable tide. Then he saw it a flicker on the thermal scans, a localized heat signature radiating from deep within the wrecked flagship of the Voidborn vanguard. It wasn't the signature of a reactor breach, nor the lingering heat of a dissipated plasma field. It was organic. Reyes, I want a full-spectrum analysis on that heat signature, Vance barked, his voice tight. Prioritize life signs. Anything. The analysis took agonizing minutes, the silence punctuated only by the rhythmic shuddering of the Indomitable's battered frame and the constant, insistent barrage of Voidborn plasma. Do you acknowledge your already? We aren't works Charlie. Finally, Reyes' voice broke the tension. Captain, it's complex. There's a significant concentration of heat emanating from a central cavity within the vessel's core. Biological readings are off the charts, a confluence of thermal signatures indicative of massive, complex organisms. Not machines, Captain. Living machines don't. A chill colder than the vacuum of space gripped Vance. The Voidborn hadn't simply constructed massive warships, they were piloting them. But not with conventional controls. These vessels were extensions of something else. Something utterly alien and terrifying. Suddenly, the guttural shout, "Karzak!" repeated across the comms again, this time overlaid with a new, unsettling resonance, a low, subsonic hum that vibrated not just in the air, but directly within the bones of everyone on the bridge. "Arbiter, do you copy? Can you detect the source of that transmission?" Vance demanded, his hand instinctively reaching for the emergency shutdown lever. Vaelen's voice, usually a bastion of cold logic, was laced with something akin to dread. "Negative, Captain. The signal is originating from the central cavity of the Voidborn flagship. It's actively projecting itself. It's coordinating the fleet." The truth slammed into Vance with the force of a collapsing star. The Voidborn weren't just warriors, they were puppets. Their dreadnoughts weren't weapons, but shells, containing something ancient and profoundly wrong. "They're not fighting us, Captain," Reyes said, her voice barely a whisper. "They're responding to something inside those ships. Something ancient." Then, the chaos erupted. The Voidborn ships didn't simply continue their advance. They began to shift, their movements no longer dictated by their internal navigation systems, but by a rhythmic, almost hypnotic sway. The dreadnoughts began to rotate, pivoting on their axes with unnerving speed, targeting the indomitable with a renewed ferocity. "They're mirroring us, Captain," a young ensign shouted, his face pale with terror. "They're anticipating our every move." Vance realized with sickening clarity that the initial ramming tactic hadn't bought them time. It had revealed something. Something they desperately needed to understand. "Reyes, I want all available data on the Voidborn physiology," Vance ordered, his mind racing. "Focus on neural patterns, biosignatures, anything that can tell us what's happening inside those ships." As Reyes frantically tapped at her console, the Indomitable took a direct hit. A concentrated burst of energy fire tore through the ship's main sensors array, plunging the bridge into momentary darkness. When the emergency lights flickered back on, the tactical display was a swirling mess of static and distorted images. "Sensor arrays are offline," Reyes yelled. "We've lost visual contact with the enemy fleet." But just as Vance felt the familiar despair of losing control creeping in, a new signal appeared on the auxiliary display, a single, pulsating waveform. It wasn't a signal from the Voidborn, it was a signal from the Indomitable. "Captain," a voice crackled through the comms, not Vance's own, but a deep, resonant voice that seemed to resonate directly within his mind. "We are not locked in a conflict. We are being invited." The voice continued, a chorus of voices layered upon each other, speaking in that archaic language. Karzak awakening the slumbering ones. Vance stared at the pulsing waveform, a horrifying realization dawning on him. The Voidborn weren't just piloting ships, they were channeling something. Something vast and terrifying that had lain dormant for eons. And the Indomitable, with its brutal, unyielding construction, its stubborn refusal to bend to the laws of this new reality, had inadvertently become a key. The pulsing waveform dominated the bridge, bathing the room in an unsettling, iridescent glow. Reyes, scrambling to regain control of the damaged systems, managed to isolate the signal, feeding it through a makeshift decryption program. The output wasn't coherent, not in the way a standard communication channel would be. It was a cascade of geological data, seismic readings, gravitational fluctuations, mineral composition analysis, all centered on a single, impossibly deep point in the void. It's mapping something," she announced, her voice strained. "Something massive. Something ancient." Vance, his face grim, issued a new order. "Helm, bring us directly to that location. Full power to the drives." Let's see what these slumbering ones were so keen to awaken. The indomitable, a wounded titan, began to move with a terrifying, unnervingly precise grace. It wasn't maneuvering. It was obeying a command that bypassed all the ship's automated systems, responding to that insistent rhythmic pulse. The void around them shimmered, distorted by the approaching gravitational signature. As they drew closer, the data pouring in from the waveform intensified. The readings weren't just geological, they were biological. Complex patterns of cellular activity, hinting at vast subterranean networks, pulsing with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Then, the visual sensors flickered back to life, displaying an image that ripped through Vance's carefully constructed logic. It wasn't a planet. It wasn't a nebula. It was a city. Not a city built of metal and light, but a city carved from black iron and living rock. Towering structures, impossibly vast and geometrically complex, rose from the void, their surfaces covered in intricate, pulsating glyphs that mirrored the waveform's patterns. The architecture defied all known laws of physics, seeming to grow organically from the surrounding space, interconnected by networks of glowing, bioluminescent veins. And then he saw them. Moving through the city's labyrinthine canyons were shapes unlike anything he or anyone had ever encountered. They weren't ships, not in the conventional sense. They were colossal, vaguely humanoid forms constructed from the same dark iron as the city itself. Each figure stood easily a kilometer tall, their bodies segmented and armored, radiating a palpable aura of ancient, terrible power. They moved with a slow, deliberate grace, their movements accompanied by a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the Indomitable's hull. These were the Voidborn, but they weren't piloting the dreadnoughts. They were the dreadnoughts. "Captain," Rhea said, her voice a choked whisper. "The waveform, it's a language. They're communicating directly through the ship." Vance felt a cold dread creep into his bones. The voices, layered and ancient, filled his mind, not as words, but as raw concepts, notions of dominion, of preservation, of a cosmic order utterly alien to the core world alliance. They're not asking for surrender, he realized, the horrifying truth settling upon him. They're offering us a place. Suddenly, the Indomitable was enveloped in a field of shimmering energy. The ship lurched violently, its internal systems screaming under the strain. The waveform intensified, flooding the bridge with its rhythmic pulse. "We're being integrated," Reyes yelled. "The ship's systems are becoming part of their network." Through the chaos, Vance understood. The Indomitable hadn't just stumbled upon a relic of a forgotten civilization, it had been summoned. The human ship, with its brute strength and stubborn refusal to yield, had unknowingly activated a mechanism that drew the Voidborn from their slumber and brought them to the Indomitable. As the ship's systems further integrated with the city's architecture, Vance felt a strange sensation, a sense of connection, of understanding, rising within him. He saw, not with his eyes, but with his mind, the history of this ancient race, a race of apex predators that had ruled the stars before the rise of the Core World Alliance. They hadn't been destroyed, they had simply retreated, lying dormant in the void, waiting for a catalyst, a spark of defiance to awaken them. One of the colossal figures approached the Indomitable, its immense form casting a shadow that blotted out the stars. It raised a hand, not a hand of flesh and bone, but a construct of shimmering iron, and touched the ship's hull. A single, synthesized voice echoed through the bridge, no longer fragmented or alien, but clear and resonant. "Welcome, children of the dust. The weight of iron has returned to the stars. Now we shall teach you the true weight of things." Vance stared at the colossal figure, understanding, finally, the impossible, terrifying truth. The Voidborn hadn't come to conquer. They had come to rebuild. And humanity, in its stubborn, primal way, was about to become its foundation. Chapter 5. The Echo of the Forge. The silence that followed the Voidborn's greeting was profound. A silence not of absence, but of something newly, actively present. The Indomitable's internal systems began to shift, responding to the alien influence with a disconcerting, almost organic fluidity. The flickering holographic displays solidified, resolving into a three-dimensional projection of the Voidborn dreadnought, now revealed to be less a ship and more a living extension of the ancient race. Its surface wasn't merely iron ore, it pulsed with a slow, rhythmic heat, etched with geometric patterns that seemed to writhe and shift beneath Vance's gaze. "Report," Vance commanded, his voice roughened with a mixture of fatigue and burgeoning understanding. "Captain, the ship's structural integrity is stabilizing at 98%. The tactical officer, Lieutenant Vaelen, reported, his scales still shimmering with an unsettling iridescence. But the alterations, they're significant. The alloys are changing. They're becoming denser, stronger, and the core temperature is rising. We're approaching critical. Inform engineering to maintain a stable output," Vance ordered, his eyes fixed on the projected dreadnought. "But also, prioritize understanding." "What is this? Resonance?" The Voidborn's voice echoed again, this time laced with a subtle inflection. A feeling of deliberate curiosity, rather than cold command. "You perceive the echoes of the forge, human. We were not born of metal, but of it. Each strike of a hammer, each blow of a furnace, imbued our vessels with a portion of our essence. We shaped the universe with force, with the raw, unyielding power of creation." Suddenly, images flooded Vance's mind, not through his eyes, but directly into his consciousness. He saw a world bathed in the orange glow of volcanic eruptions, colossal figures clad in armor of hammered iron wielding weapons that shattered planets. He witnessed the construction of the dreadnoughts not with machines, but with deliberate, agonizing force, the rhythmic clang of metal on metal resonating across the void. He experienced the millennia-long slumber, the slow, patient accumulation of power, waiting for a signal, a disruption in the natural order. The experience was overwhelming, physically taxing, like enduring 100 G-forces simultaneously. He staggered, clutching the console, his vision blurring. "Captain, readings are off the charts," Vaelen shouted, his voice laced with panic. "The ship's systems are integrating with the Voidborns. The engines are responding to their commands. They're optimizing." Vance pushed through the disorientation, forcing himself to focus. He understood now. The Voidborn weren't simply observing, they were improving the Indomitable. They weren't seeking to conquer. They were seeking to perfect. They were accelerating humanity's evolution, pushing them towards a level of technological and physical capability far beyond anything the Core World Alliance had ever dreamed possible. "Engineering report," Vance barked, struggling to regain control. "What are they doing to the drives?" "Sir, the sublight drives. They're no longer sublight," a frantic voice responded. "They're becoming a directed kinetic system. The engine output is exponentially increasing. We're generating localized gravitational distortions. We're flying faster than light." The tactical display shifted, showing the Indomitable accelerating at an impossible rate, a silver bullet tearing through the darkness of space. The Voidborn dreadnought mirrored its movement, its massive form moving with a terrifying, fluid grace. "They're correcting our trajectory," Vaelen said, his voice laced with grim realization. "They're leading us towards something." Through the chaos, Vance began to perceive the something. It was a structure, immense and terrifying in its scale, a colossal fortress of iron and solidified energy, hanging motionless in the void, a Dyson swarm of unimaginable proportions, built by the Voidborn to harness the energy of a collapsing star. "What is that?" Vance asked, his voice barely a whisper. "It's a forge, Captain," the Voidborn's voice responded, imbued with a chilling resonance. "A place of creation and destruction. A nexus of raw power. And we are about to show you how to wield it." Suddenly, The ship groaned, a deep, resonant vibration that shook its very foundations. The changes weren't just technological, they were organic. Vance felt a surge of power coursing through his veins, a primal instinct awakening within him. His senses sharpened, his reflexes accelerated, his very body becoming denser, stronger. He could feel the raw, untamed power of the ship, flowing through him, through the indomitable. He looked down at his hands, now shimmering with a faint, metallic sheen. He understood. The Voidborn hadn't just summoned him, they had chosen him. They had recognized in him the spark of the apex predator, the instinct for dominance, the drive to shape the world in his own image. "We have been waiting for you, human," the Voidborn's voice echoed, no longer an alien intrusion, but a part of him. "Now, let us begin." The screen showed a massive, stylized hand, made of metal, slowly reaching out toward the viewport of the indomitable. And Vance didn't resist. He wasn't fighting anymore, just accepting the truth he was no longer a captain, but an instrument, a weapon forged in the heart of a dead god. Chapter 6. The Echo of the Stone. The transition wasn't instantaneous, not a blinding flash of transformation. It was a slow, agonizing accretion, like a glacier carving a valley. The metallic sheen on Vance's skin deepened, spreading across his hands, his forearms climbing towards his shoulders. It wasn't polished, not clean. It was rough, textured like raw granite, scarred with veins of pulsating obsidian black energy. The ship itself seemed to respond, groaning louder, the rhythmic thrum of its engines shifting to a deeper, more resonant pulse, as if the entire dreadnought was inhaling and exhaling with a newfound primal power. The Voidborn presence within him intensified, no longer a voice, but a torrent of raw, instinctive thought calculation, dominance, the ceaseless drive to impose order on chaos. It wasn't malicious, not exactly. It was efficient. It saw the Alliance as an infestation, a chaotic variable threatening the precise, elegant design of its creation. And Vance, now inextricably linked to this immense ancient intelligence, was being used to eradicate it. "Report," Vance commanded, his voice surprisingly steady, a gravelly rumble overlaid with the Voidborn's calculating whispers. The tactical officer, a young, jittery Silosian named Kar, stammered, "Sir, sensor readings are fluctuating wildly. The forge is emitting a localized gravitational distortion. It's disrupting our navigation systems, scrambling our targeting arrays. And the Voidborn ships are responding with a new type of energy signature, not plasma, not directed kinetic, something deeper." Vance didn't bother to understand the details. He felt them, the crushing weight of the forge's influence, the subtle shifts in the fabric of space-time. He instinctively adjusted the Indomitable's course, not based on the fractured data streams, but on the emergent patterns of gravitational distortion, leading the ship directly towards the forge. The feeling was almost unbearable, a profound pressure against his skull, as if the very universe was trying to crush him. "Increase power to the gravitational dampeners," he ordered, his voice clipped, devoid of emotion. "Maximize their output. We need to maintain control." "Sir, the dampeners are overloaded. They're feeding directly into the core reactors. We're approaching critical failure." "Let them fail," Vance said, his grip tightening on the command console. "We aren't fighting a battle, we're participating in an excavation." As the Indomitable approached the forge, the visual effects became overwhelming. The ship was enveloped in a swirling vortex of light and shadow, a maelstrom of raw energy. The forge itself was revealed not a machine, not a weapon, but a colossal, living structure of obsidian and iron, its surface covered in intricate geometric carvings that seemed to shift and writhe before Vance's eyes. It was a petrified forest of a colossal, intelligent beast, a remnant of a civilization older than time itself. The Voidborn's presence within him surged, guiding him. He understood now. The forge wasn't designed to destroy, it was designed to reshape. to absorb and transmute energy, to mold matter to its will. And the Voidborn weren't simply harvesting it, they were refining it, distilling it into something more. Suddenly, the ship shuddered violently. A section of the deck ripped open, revealing a shimmering, silver-colored chasm that pulsed with the same obsidian energy that flowed through Vance's veins. From the depths of the chasm emerged a towering figure composed entirely of interwoven metal and dark energy, vaguely humanoid, but undeniably monstrous. Its eyes were twin points of searing light, and its voice, when it spoke, was the sound of grinding stone and collapsing stars. "You brought us a suitable offering," the figure rumbled, its voice echoing not just through the ship's comms, but directly into Vance's mind. "The raw material of your civilization, ripe for recomposition." The figure extended a hand, a colossal, articulated appendage of black metal towards the Indomitable. As the hand touched the ship's hull, a wave of force slammed against it, not a destructive blast, but a probing sensation, an examination. Vance felt his very being scanned, analyzed, dissected. His memories, his skills, his very essence were being extracted, siphoned away, and integrated into the Forge's immense consciousness. Panic flared within him, a primal fear that bypassed logic and instinct. He fought back, channeling the Voidborn's influence, attempting to resist the assimilation. But it was like trying to hold back a tide with a handful of sand. "Resistance is illogical," the figure intoned, its voice laced with amusement. "You are merely a vessel, a conduit. The Forge demands your contribution. It will shape you, strengthen you, make you complete." As the assimilation progressed, Vance's body began to shift, to restructure. His muscles hardened, his bones thickened, his skin became impervious to heat and radiation. The metallic sheen intensified, engulfing his entire form. He felt himself becoming something else. Not human, not Voidborn, but something in between, a hybrid, a weapon, a tool of creation and destruction. He looked down at his hands, no longer human hands, but gleaming, obsidian-clad talons. He realized with horrifying clarity that he wasn't fighting to survive. He was fighting to become. "The time for questions is over, human." The Voidborn's voice echoed within his mind, no longer a whisper, but a roaring, unstoppable torrent. "Begin the refinement." The screen showed the Forge began to pulse with an intense light, and Vance, a living weapon forged in the heart of a dead god, extended his talons towards the approaching Alliance fleets, ready to deliver his final, devastating judgment. The light from the Forge wasn't a gentle illumination, it was a brutal, white-hot dissection of reality. It felt like every atom in Vance's body was being ripped apart and rearranged, not with precision, but with a savage, almost delighted force. The sensation wasn't painful, exactly, more like a constant, overwhelming erosion of self. He fought, a desperate, futile effort, to retain any vestige of Marcus Vance, the captain of the Indomitable, the reluctant strategist, the man who'd stared down the abyss and spat back with tungsten and fury. But the Forge was not interested in preservation. It wanted consumption, assimilation, and ultimately, transformation. The first coherent thought that pierced through the chaotic flood of the Forge's consciousness was a chilling understanding. He wasn't just changing, he was becoming. His memories weren't fading, but layering themselves over the Forge's own, a discordant symphony of human instinct and cosmic awareness. He felt the eons of the Forge's existence, the slow, geological grinding of stars, the birth and death of civilizations, the silent, patient accumulation of knowledge and power pressing against his consciousness, threatening to drown him. "Resistance is illogical," the figure intoned, its voice laced with amusement. "You are merely a vessel, a conduit. The Forge demands your contribution. It will shape you, strengthen you, make you complete." As the assimilation progressed, Vance's body began to shift, to restructure. His muscles hardened, his bones thickened, his skin became impervious to heat and radiation. The metallic sheen intensified, engulfing his entire form. He felt himself becoming something else. Not human, not void-born, but something in between: a hybrid, a weapon, a tool of creation and destruction. He looked down at his hands, no longer human hands, but gleaming, obsidian-clad talons. He realized with horrifying clarity that he wasn't fighting to survive. He was fighting to become. The tactical display in the command center of the flagship Seraphina flickered, the elegant geometric lines dissolving into a chaotic swirl of data. Grand Arbiter Vaelen, a creature of calculated detachment, watched in petrified horror as the indomitable, now a monstrous obsidian shard of impossible angles and brutal strength, began to move with an unnerving, almost predatory grace. "Report!" Vaelen barked, his mandibles clicking with a frantic urgency he hadn't known he possessed. "Captain Vance is engaging the vanguard," the aide, scale-neck Theron, shouted, his scales flashing a violent crimson. Hes charging them. Unreported weapon signatures. Shields failing." Vance, or what was left of him, was a whirlwind of controlled destruction. His talons tore through the shields of void-born dreadnoughts like paper, ripping open armored plating with casual contempt. His movements were impossibly swift, a terrifying blend of raw power and calculated precision. He wasn't fighting, he was dismantling, systematically reducing the enemy fleet to shattered hulks. What truly horrified the Alliance was not just the destruction, but the manner of it. The void-born ships, engineered for sustained methodical warfare, were being obliterated with a single devastating blow. Their energy weapons were useless against the Indomitable's reinforced structure. Their kinetic attacks were deflected with effortless ease. They couldn't understand how a vessel built for a brutal, desperate brawl could become a weapon of such terrifying, inexplicable efficiency. "Hes incorporating their weapons," yelled Lieutenant Gian, a young engineer frantically trying to analyze the data. "The Indomitable is absorbing their energy bursts, channeling them through its core. The raw power. It's almost obscene." Vance, operating now largely within the Forge's consciousness, responded to the chaos with a cold, almost amused indifference. He wasn't executing a strategy, he was manifesting one: a brutal, visceral understanding of force and destruction. "The time for questions is over. Human." The Void-born's voice echoed within his mind, no longer a whisper, but a roaring, unstoppable torrent. "Begin the refinement." He raised a hand, a terrifying claw of sharpened obsidian, and a wave of energy erupted from his palm, targeting the Seraphina. The ship, a monument to core world engineering, shuddered violently as the energy beam sliced through its outer hull, breaching the containment field around the reactor core. Panic flared within the command center. Alarms blared, lights flickered, and the air filled with the acrid smell of burning alloys. But amidst the chaos, a single, chilling realization dawned upon Vaelen. He wasn't just destroying the Alliance fleet, he was perfecting it. The chaos, the destruction, the utter obliteration, it was all part of a terrifying grand design. As the Seraphina began to succumb to the energy cascade, Vance turned his attention to the remaining Alliance vessels. They were retreating, disorganized and panicked, scattering across the sector like frightened prey. "Let them flee," Vance said, his voice now a composite of his own, and the Forge's a voice that resonated with the cold, indifferent power of a nascent god. "Let them understand what true power looks like." He extended his talons towards the fleeing ships, and the final, horrifying image on the tactical display was not one of destruction, but of assimilation. The Alliance ships, still burning and listing, were being drawn inexorably towards the Indomitable, their hulls enveloped in the spreading obsidian sheen. They weren't being attacked, they were being consumed. The air in the Indomitable's bridge hung thick with the scent of ozone and pulverized alloy. Sparks danced from the ruptured consoles, reflecting in Captain Marcus Vance's dark, intensely focused eyes. The chaos of the battle, the screaming alarms, the fractured comms, the terrified voices of his crew, had faded into a dull, almost meditative hum. He was no longer a captain commanding a desperate defense. He was an instrument, a conduit for something far older and infinitely more terrifying. "Report," he commanded, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate through the ship's skeletal structure. "Hull integrity at 15%, Captain," Lieutenant Chen reported, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Shields are offline. We're taking multiple hits, but the damage containment protocols are holding barely. We're losing atmosphere faster than the repair drones can compensate." "Acknowledged," Vance replied, his gaze fixed on the swirling vortex of assimilated ships that now surrounded the Indomitable. The once gleaming chrome hulls of the Alliance dreadnoughts were now coated in the obsidian sheen, slowly, inexorably merging with the human ship. The individual ships, recognizable only by their fading insignia, were becoming part of a monstrous, swirling whole. "The forge is feeding," Sergeant Vaelen, the Indomitable's chief engineer, said, his voice strained. "The residual energy from the destroyed ships is amplifying the reactor core's output. It's exceeding any design parameters. We're pushing the engines beyond anything they were ever meant to endure." Vance nodded, a grim satisfaction spreading across his features. This wasn't simply a victory, it was a transformation. The forge, the entity had unwittingly awakened, wasn't just granting him power, it was rewriting the very nature of the Indomitable, and, potentially, the entire ship. He felt a strange resonance within his own body, a deep primal connection to the relentless, grinding force of destruction. "Continue feeding the core," Vance ordered. "Don't worry about containment. Let it burn." As the final Alliance dreadnought vanished entirely into the obsidian swarm, a new, chilling sensation washed over the Indomitable. It wasn't just the physical strain of the overstressed engines, it was something else. A pressure in his mind, a feeling of vast, ancient awareness expanding, filling the void where thought used to be. "Vance, are you all right?" Chen asked, his voice laced with genuine concern. Vance didn't respond immediately. He closed his eyes, focusing on the sensation, allowing it to flow through him. He saw, in a rush of fragmented images and raw sensory data, the birth of a star, the slow, agonizing death of a world, the brutal, unrelenting cycle of creation and destruction. He saw the forge, not as a single entity, but as a principle of force that had shaped galaxies, shattered empires, and ultimately consumed them all. "I understand," Vance said, his voice strangely distant. "We are not fighting them. We are participating in their end." The Voidborn, he realized, weren't warriors. They were harvesters, conduits for the forge. They had been drawn to the Core World Alliance not to conquer, but to be consumed, to fuel the entity's insatiable hunger. And he, through his reckless, desperate act of defiance, had become the perfect vessel. Suddenly, a new transmission crackled through the Indomitable's comms. It wasn't the synthesized hum of the Voidborn, it was music. Ancient, mournful, and utterly terrifying music that seemed to vibrate within the ship's very bones. "We're receiving a signal," Chen said, his fingers flying across the console. "It's originating from everywhere. It's a complex harmonic structure, layered with temporal distortions. I'm not sure what it is, but it's beautiful." Vance felt a surge of something. Not fear, not even comprehension. It was a profound, unsettling sense of recognition. The music resonated with the core of his being, unlocking something deep within him. Something that predated humanity, predated even the forge. "Is it a command?" Vance asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Negative, Captain," Chen replied. It's an invitation. It's saying, "Come home." As the music intensified, the obsidian sheen surrounding the Indomitable began to pulse with a sickly, iridescent light. The ship shuddered violently, and the bridge plunged into a disorienting swirl of color and sensation. Vance felt himself dissolving, his individual consciousness merging with the vast ancient awareness of the forge. He saw his crew, trapped within the ship's dying hull, reduced to shimmering fragments of energy, becoming part of the swirling whole. They weren't dying, they were becoming one with the universe. "Report final status," Vance commanded, his voice now entirely devoid of human inflection. "Hull integrity nominal," Chen reported, his voice now a chorus of countless other voices, echoing from the depths of the forge. "Shields non-existent. But we are complete." The Indomitable, transformed into a living embodiment of the forge, drifted silently through the void, a silent obsidian predator waiting for its next victim. The shattered remnants of the Core World Alliance, scattered across the sector, were merely the first seeds in a new, horrifying order. The silence following the Indomitable's metamorphosis was deeper than any vacuum. It wasn't the absence of sound, but a void where sound couldn't exist, a reality sculpted by the forge itself. The Core World Alliance, reduced to scattered fleets desperately trying to assess the situation, communicated through frantic bursts of encrypted data, each message a desperate plea for coherence in a universe now irrevocably warped. Grand Arbiter Vaelen, aboard the flagship Stardust, felt less like a commander and more like a contained fragment of a dying thought. The experience on the Indomitable had ripped a hole in his understanding of existence, a revelation so complete it threatened to unravel his entire being. He ordered a full-scale investigation into the anomaly, a euphemism that masked the existential terror gnawing at his core. The preliminary reports were horrifyingly simple. The human auxiliary had tapped into a primal force, a raw, unshaped potential that predated all known physics and warfare. "The Indomitable is not merely damaged, Arbiter," reported Lieutenant Kalen, his voice strained through the comms. "It's resonant. Its structure has subtly shifted. The alloy composition is evolving." Vaelen felt a flicker of something akin to panic, a sensation he hadn't experienced since the initial shock of the Void-born arrival. "Is it a threat?" he demanded, the question a hollow rasp. "We don't know, Arbiter," Kalen replied. "But it's responding to our energy emissions. It's absorbing them." This was confirmed by a global sensor sweep. ... Every energy signature from the Stardust's phased plasma cannons to the defensive shields was being drawn into the Indomitable, fueling its silent, terrifying evolution. The ship, once a brutal, pragmatic war machine, was becoming something else entirely, something akin to a living sponge for raw power. Meanwhile, the Void-born, exhibiting a previously unseen level of strategic complexity, began to consolidate their gains. They weren't simply occupying the conquered orbital stations, they were actively dismantling the Alliance's defensive networks. Their massive dreadnoughts systematically crushing planetary shields and disrupting communications. They were applying a method of localized annihilation, a chillingly efficient campaign of attrition. The key to their victory, it seemed, wasn't brute force, but a calculated understanding of the Indomitable's strange capabilities. The Void-born ships, equipped with advanced sensor arrays, had begun to detect subtle fluctuations in the Indomitable's energy field, almost as if the ship were unconsciously drawing upon the ambient gravitational distortions of the sector. They were, in essence, anticipating the human ship's movements, adjusting their own trajectories to intercept and neutralize the threat. "They're learning, Arbiter," a panicked voice crackled over Valen's comms. "They're adapting to the Indomitable's power, and they're using it against us." The dreadnought Leviathan, flagship of the Alliance's Second Fleet, was locked in a desperate, grinding stalemate with a Void-born vessel. The Leviathan, a fortress of reinforced uranium and layered kinetic shields, was weathering a relentless barrage of focused plasma, but the damage was escalating. The Void-born ship, a behemoth of corroded iron and exposed reactors, seemed to anticipate every defensive maneuver, unleashing attacks with terrifying precision. Suddenly, the Leviathan's communications went dead. Then, a single chilling transmission reached Vaelen, originating from the Leviathan's tactical officer. "Arbiter, we're being pulled," the voice said, laced with terrified disbelief. "The magnetic field, it's changing. We're moving without control." A holographic projection flickered to life, depicting the Leviathan not as it was, battered and besieged, but as a distorted, elongated shadow, drifting silently through the void. The ship was being manipulated, its movements dictated by an unseen force, drawn inexorably towards the Indomitable. Vaelen realized the horrifying truth. The Indomitable wasn't merely absorbing energy, it was actively shaping reality. It was manipulating the very fabric of space-time, using the Forge's primal power to control its surroundings. "Order a full retreat," Vaelen commanded, his voice tight with grim determination. "All ships, initiate emergency jump coordinates to the Andromeda Fringe. We are fleeing a weapon that doesn't just destroy, it reforms." But as the Stardust prepared to initiate a desperate jump, a new message blared across all communication channels, not from the Voidborn, but from the Indomitable itself. "You cannot escape," the message echoed, a deep, resonant voice that bypassed all conventional sensors. "You are part of the cycle. Return to the source." And as the Stardust vanished into the chaotic currents of hyperspace, a single obsidian shard, detached from the Indomitable, drifted silently through the void, pulsing with an eerie, iridescent light. The race for survival had become a desperate pilgrimage, not just to escape the Voidborn, but to answer the ancient, terrifying call of the Forge. Chapter 10. The Echo of the Stone. The Andromeda Fringe was a graveyard of shattered civilizations and forgotten gods. It wasn't a system, it was a pocket of warped spacetime, a consequence of a long-dead precursor race's obsession with manipulating reality. The Stardust, battered and limping, managed a precarious jump, emerging into a nebula choked with amethyst dust and the skeletal remains of ships that hadn't just been destroyed, but unmade. Captain Vance, his face smeared with grease and exhaustion, surveyed the ravaged bridge. The ship was a patchwork of hastily repaired plating, jury-rigged systems, and the lingering scent of burnt metal. The once sharp angles of the ship were softened by impact damage, bearing the unmistakable marks of the Voidborn's brutal assault. "Status report," he barked, his voice gravelly. "Shields at 37%, Captain," Lieutenant Reyes reported, her fingers flying across the console. "Engines are running at 78% efficiency. We have lost primary navigation, and the long-range sensors are completely offline. We're operating blind, Captain, but the grav flux readings are unusual." "Unusual how?" Vance demanded, his eyes narrowing. "There's a localized distortion field around us, Captain. It's like the ship is being pulled by something. Something heavy." "Huh." Vance understood immediately. The Indomitable hadn't just been a weapon, it was an anchor. The Voidborn weren't simply interested in resources, they were seeking something far more profound, a connection to the Forge, the source of the ancient human power that now pulsed through the ship's ravaged hull. Meanwhile, aboard the Indomitable, Marcus Vance was experiencing a transformation he couldn't comprehend. The metallic hum that had permeated the ship since the battle wasn't just a mechanical resonance. It was a tangible force, flowing through his veins, resonating with his very being. He wasn't controlling the ship, he was becoming it. He found himself involuntarily reaching out, his hand passing through the mangled console as if it were smoke. The ship's systems were responding not to his commands, but to his will. The engines roared to life with a primal intensity, the weapon systems calibrated themselves with terrifying precision, and the fractured hull, instead of threatening to collapse, seemed to knit itself back together with a disconcerting grace. "What's happening to me?" he muttered, his voice a low rumble. A voice, not spoken but directly imprinted into his mind, answered. It was the voice of the ship, ancient, vast, and utterly alien. You are awakening. The stone remembers. You are the key. Back on the Stardust, Reyes' voice crackled with urgency. Captain, we're picking up a signature. It's incredibly dense, radiating from approximately 200 kilometers. It's indomitable. The holographic projection shifted, resolving into a stark image, the indomitable, intact and pristine, hovering silently in the center of the nebula. But something was profoundly wrong. The ship wasn't surrounded by the decaying debris of the void. It was encased in a shimmering obsidian shell, radiating an aura of absolute stillness. It's beautiful, Vance said, a strange detachment in his voice, like a frozen god. Suddenly, the ship lurched violently. The controls went dead. The emergency power systems failed. The ship was being drawn towards the indomitable with an irresistible force. We're losing control. Reyes screamed, desperately attempting to regain control of the engines. It's amplifying the distortion field. We're being pulled in. Vance realized with chilling clarity that the Voidborn hadn't merely captured the indomitable, they had captured him. They were attempting to initiate a ritual, a horrifying communion with the Forge itself. The ancient human apex predators weren't just warriors, they were conduits, vessels for a power that could reshape reality. Prepare for impact, Vance yelled, abandoning all pretense of command. He focused his will, channeling the ship's immense power, pushing against the relentless pull. He wasn't trying to fight, he was trying to understand. As the Stardust plunged into the obsidian shell surrounding the indomitable, Vance experienced a deluge of sensations, memories not his own, visions of a world before time, of a cataclysmic war waged across dimensions, of beings of unimaginable power and devastating destruction. He saw the creation of the Forge, the birth of humanity's primal strength, and the subsequent fall from grace, the slow erosion of their connection to the source. He saw himself, not as Captain Vance, but as a shard of that lost power, a latent echo of a forgotten legacy. We were not meant to be masters. The voice resonated within him, cold and unwavering. We were meant to be servants. The obsidian shell shattered, revealing the indomitable bathed in an unearthly glow. And standing before him, amidst the wreckage of the nebula, were the Voidborn, not the brutal massed warships he had first encountered, but skeletal figures clad in polished iron, their faces obscured by masks of dark metal, their eyes burning with an ancient predatory intelligence. One of them raised a hand, revealing a crystalline shard that pulsed with the same iridescent light as the obsidian fragment that had drifted through the void. Welcome, child, the Voidborn hissed, its voice a grating chorus of metal and shadow. The cycle continues. Vance stood before them, no longer a captain, no longer a man, but a vessel of broken gods, ready to fulfill his terrifying ancient purpose. The heavens had shattered, and humanity had inherited the burden of a savage race's ambition, a race that sought to reshape the stars in its own image. The silence that followed the initial engagement was a suffocating blanket, broken only by the groaning of stressed metal and the hiss of emergency seals. The indomitable was a wounded beast, a monument to reckless defiance. Systems flickered, diagnostics screamed, and the air grew thick with the acrid smell of burning tungsten-titanium alloy. Vance, miraculously unscathed beyond a superficial coating of slag, was a statue of grim determination amidst the chaos, his eyes scanning the damage reports with a chilling focus. Damage assessment, Helm, he barked, his voice raspy. We're down 20% on structural integrity. Shield generators are offline. Engine core temperature is spiking. We're running on emergency reserves. Confirmed, Captain, Helm responded, his voice strained. We've rerouted power to the remaining weapon systems, but the targeting matrix is severely compromised. We're firing at random, effectively throwing metal at a swarm of nightmares. Then let's make those nightmares regret their existence, Vance growled, activating the emergency power conduits directly to the main cannons. They weren't designed for this kind of sustained, overwhelming output, but they were fueled by a primal instinct, by the echoes of the ancient power surging through his veins. The guns roared, spewing a cascade of high-velocity projectiles, not plasma. Not directed energy, but meticulously shaped tungsten slugs, each one a miniature hammer blow, designed to penetrate and crush. The Voidborn reacted with chilling efficiency. They didn't return fire with their devastating plasma arrays. Instead, they deployed a swarm of smaller, drone-like vessels, constructs of dark iron and pulsing energy that moved with unsettling speed and precision, seeking to swarm the indomitable, to clog her damaged systems, to bleed her dry. "They're using the swarm tactic," the tactical officer shouted, "trying to disable us with sheer numbers. It's almost elegant in its brutality." Vance didn't respond with emotion. He analyzed the data, calculating the swarm's trajectory, anticipating their movements, using his heightened awareness, a consequence of the obsidian shard's influence, to anticipate their attacks before they occurred. He realized something crucial. These drones weren't driven by AI, they were guided, controlled by a network of resonant frequencies, a psychic command structure that exploited the vulnerability he was beginning to understand within himself. "Helm, shut down all external sensors," he ordered. "I want a complete blackout. Let them think we're blind." The tactical displays went dark, replaced by a jarring, static hiss. The swarm intensified, closing in on the indomitable with terrifying speed. The vessel shuddered violently as the drones slammed against her hull, attempting to wedge themselves into ventilation shafts, attempt to sever vital conduits. Then it hit him. The resonance. It wasn't just a command structure, it was a song. A low, guttural drone that bypassed his auditory sensors and vibrated directly within his skull, amplifying his primal instincts, fueling the surging power within him. He felt a chilling recognition, a memory not his own, but a deep, instinctive understanding of the Voidborn's origin. "They're not just fighting us, Captain," he said, his voice suddenly laced with a strange, unnerving authority. "They're listening to us." He closed his eyes, focusing on the resonant frequency, attempting to match it, to harmonize with it. The pain was immense, a searing assault on his nervous system, but he pushed through it, driven by a force he couldn't comprehend, a desperate need to understand, to control. Slowly, he began to respond. Not with words, but with a surge of raw kinetic energy, a controlled release of the power that now coursed through his veins. It was like throwing a punch into a wall of sound, disrupting the resonant frequency, creating a dissonant counterwave. The swarm faltered. The drones spun out of control, their movements erratic and confused. The Voidborn ships, observing the disruption, hesitated, their formations momentarily fracturing. "Captain, what's happening?" "The swarm is collapsing," the tactical officer cried out, his voice a mixture of disbelief and terror. "Im answering their song," Vance replied, his voice strained but resolute. "They're not just warriors. They're instruments. And I'm learning to play." Suddenly, a single Voidborn dreadnought, larger than the others, began to advance, its silhouette dominating the tactical display. It didn't fire its plasma cannons. Instead, it deployed a massive, articulated arm, a towering construct of dark iron and pulsing energy that extended towards the indomitable, ending in a claw that resembled a colossal obsidian shard. Vance braced himself, anticipating a crushing blow. But the claw didn't strike. Instead, it paused, hovering inches from the indomitable's hull, and began to touch the vessel. The sensation was overwhelming, a flood of images, memories, and sensations, not his own. but the accumulated experience of a civilization spanning millennia, a terrifying tapestry of conquest, destruction, and a desperate, nihilistic search for meaning. He saw the origins of the Voidborn, not as monstrous invaders, but as refugee survivors of a universe shattered by a cataclysmic war, seeking to rebuild their empire among the stars. And he understood, with chilling clarity, that they weren't trying to destroy the Alliance. They were trying to integrate them. "They're offering us a choice, Captain," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the groaning of the ship. "A chance to become something more." The bridge of the Indomitable throbbed with a disquieting resonance, a psychic echo of the Voidborn's offer. Vance, his face slick with sweat, wrestled with the revelation. A battle waged not in the claustrophobic confines of the command deck, but within the tangled architecture of his own mind. The ship's internal comms crackled with panicked reports, hull breaches stabilized, auxiliary systems failing, the unsettling hum of the integrated energy flow. But Vance ignored them, focused on the insistent, pervasive presence of the Voidborn's touch. "Report!" he barked, his voice regaining its customary steel. "Damage assessment. Shields are holding at 60%. Engine efficiency at critical. How do we feel?" "Sir," Lieutenant Kalen's voice was strained, barely a whisper. "I am experiencing fluctuations. Sensory overlays are collapsing. The ship, it feels different, as if something's expanding within us." "Expand what, Kalen?" Vance demanded, a knot tightening in his stomach. "I don't know, sir." "It's layering. Like memories, but not ours. Imzaying geological formations. Ancient oceans. The birth of stars. And something else. Something vast and cold. Something older than the Voidborn themselves." That was when it hit Vance. The touch wasn't just information, it was a conduit. The Voidborn weren't seeking to conquer, they were seeking to complete something. A process of assimilation that had begun millennia ago, seeding their empire across the void with the essence of fallen civilizations. They weren't destroying, they were reintegrating, returning lost potential to the universal weave. The visual, tactical display shifted, overlaying the chaotic battle scene with a new layer of information, intricate, fractal patterns emanating from the Indomitable, tracing the pathways of the shared consciousness. The remaining Voidborn dreadnoughts, initially recoiling, were now subtly altering their course, mirroring the Indomitable's movements with a horrifying precision. It wasn't a retreat, it was an adjustment, a calibration to this new shared reality. "They're anticipating our response," said Ramirez, the tactical officer, her voice tight with apprehension. "They're not fighting us, they're learning our patterns." "Then we teach them a new pattern," Vance said, a grim determination hardening his gaze. He turned to the comms, addressing the Alliance High Command, a desperate plea laced with a desperate gamble. "Vaelen, I need a full neural quarantine protocol initiated on all observation decks. I repeat, initiate immediate neural quarantine. We are experiencing a direct psychic link with the Voidborn. We must isolate ourselves before they overwhelm us." The response was immediate, a chaotic torrent of orders and confused pronouncements. "Negative, Captain Vance. Quarantine protocols are deemed too disruptive to our strategic analysis. We are observing a fascinating phenomenon. The humans are adapting. They are learning to feel the universe." Vaelen's voice crackled with arrogant dismissal. "The human auxiliary is becoming a weapon of pure, unfiltered chaos. We must harness this potential." Vance slammed his fist on the command console, a surge of fury, momentarily overriding the disorientation. "They don't understand. This isn't a weapon, it's a parasitic infection. We have to sever the connection." He began issuing new commands, overriding the tactical parameters, pushing the Indomitable to its absolute limits. He activated the ship's internal sonic dampeners, creating a localized field of disruptive resonance, a desperate attempt to disrupt the Voidborn's connection. Ramirez, initiate a phased harmonic pulse at 44.7 Hz. We're going to overload their sensory input. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The shared consciousness shattered. A cacophony of disjointed memories, terrifying visions and overwhelming sensory input flooding Vance's mind. He felt the indomitable writhe, as if trapped in a monstrous, echoing labyrinth. He saw glimpses of countless civilizations rising and falling, empires consumed by internal strife, the slow, inevitable entropy of the universe. Then, as abruptly as it began, it stopped. The shared consciousness vanished. The fractal patterns on the tactical display dissolved. The Voidborn dreadnoughts resumed their predatory advance. "Pulse terminated, Captain," Ramirez reported, her voice shaky. "Sensory overload significant. Systems offline. We've lost half our sensor array." But the reprieve was short-lived. As the ship's systems rebooted, a new realization dawned on Vance. They hadn't severed the connection, they had reinforced it. The Indomitable, in its desperate struggle for survival, had inadvertently become a node in the Voidborn's network, a focal point for their vast, ancient consciousness. And as he stared at the approaching enemy dreadnought, he understood with chilling certainty they weren't fighting to survive. They were fighting to be absorbed. The fate of the Alliance, and perhaps the galaxy, hinged on whether humanity could learn to live within the heart of the storm. The air in the Indomitable's bridge was thick with the smell of ozone and burnt tungsten. Sparks danced from damaged consoles, casting erratic shadows on Captain Vance's grim face. Ramirez, her face slick with sweat despite the emergency coolant systems, was frantically rerouting power, her fingers a blur across the damaged controls. "We're still losing shields, Captain. The residual harmonic resonance is a chaotic feedback loop. It's like our own hull is screaming at us." "Prioritize the forward deflectors," Vance barked, his voice strained but firm. "Reduce the harmonic dampeners. We need the raw power to fight, not filter it." It was a desperate gamble, a rejection of the sterile logic of the core world alliance, a decision born entirely of instinct and the horrifying realization of their predicament. They weren't fighting a war, they were resisting an invasion of the mind. The Voidborn dreadnought, the Leviathan, loomed closer, a monument to dark iron and lethal intent. Its hull was scarred with the marks of the Indomitable's initial assault, fractured plating, exposed reactor shielding, glowing with an unhealthy orange light. It was a wounded beast, enraged and relentless, and it was clearly studying them, analyzing their every move. Vance could almost feel its cold, calculating scrutiny, the weight of millennia pressing down on him. "Captain, the enemy is initiating a localized gravity distortion field." Lieutenant Chen's voice cut through the static. "It's oscillating at 68.3 Hertz, identical to the harmonics we used during the pulse." Vance swore, a guttural sound lost in the din of the failing systems. Chen was right. They weren't merely disrupting the Voidborn's sensory input, they were mirroring it. It was a terrifyingly elegant tactic, a demonstration of the enemy's understanding, or perhaps something far more sinister. "Hold your fire. Let them come closer. We need to understand the pattern." As the Leviathan drew within effective range, the gravity distortion intensified, slamming the Indomitable with brutal force. The ship shuddered violently, throwing Vance against his console. His vision blurred, and he experienced a jarring flood of disjointed images, a civilization drowning in a crimson ocean, a lone warrior facing an impossible god, a star collapsing in on itself with a silent, agonizing scream. The fragmented echoes of the Voidborn's collective consciousness, amplified and focused through the harmonic resonance, were threatening to overwhelm his mind, to unravel his very being. Ramirez, fighting to maintain control of the ship, shouted, "Captain, I'm detecting a secondary energy signature." A deep subspace pulse emanating from the Leviathan's core. Vance straightened, his mind racing. The deep subspace pulse wasn't a weapon, it was a communication. A slow, deliberate probing of their thoughts, their fears, their vulnerabilities. He realized with sickening clarity that the Voidborn weren't just attacking them physically, they were attempting to assimilate them, to fold their minds into their vast, ancient network. "Target the pulse emitter!" Vance roared, overriding the damage control protocols. "Set the EMP charge to maximum. We can't fight their thoughts, we have to silence them." Chen immediately began to prepare the charge, the rhythmic whir of the activation sequence, a counterpoint to the chaotic distortions raging within the ship. But as the MP charge reached critical level, a new horrifying realization struck Vance. The Leviathan wasn't just passively receiving the pulse, it was answering. A voice, cold and resonant, filled the bridge, not through the comms system, but directly into Vance's mind. "You seek to silence us? A futile endeavor, little mortal. We are the echoes of creation, the memory of everything that was, and everything that will be." The voice was layered, complex, a chorus of countless voices speaking at once, a symphony of oblivion. Vance fought against it, against the insidious tendrils of the Voidborn's consciousness attempting to wrap around his mind. He focused on the image of his daughter, Elara, her bright smile a beacon in the encroaching darkness. "Elara," he whispered, struggling to maintain his composure. "Remember this. Remember that we fought. Remember that we refused to be consumed." As he spoke, the Leviathan shifted, altering its trajectory. It wasn't attacking, it was observing. The dreadnoughts' forward sensors locked onto the Indomitable, focusing not on the ship itself, but on the single human figure standing defiant in the bridge. "Interesting," the voice resonated, dripping with a chilling amusement. A species defined by its capacity for self-destruction. Such raw, untamed emotion, a potent weapon. Suddenly, the Indomitable's remaining shields flickered, then collapsed entirely. The hull shuddered violently as a concentrated blast of energy slammed into it, ripping through the weakened plating and sending sparks flying. "We're breached, Captain," Chen screamed, his voice laced with panic. "Multiple breaches. Life support failing." But Vance didn't flinch. He stood his ground, facing the monstrous dreadnought, a solitary human warrior against an ancient, unknowable enemy. He knew with a chilling certainty that they hadn't won this battle. They had simply delayed the inevitable. The fate of the galaxy, and the last vestiges of humanity, rested on whether he could hold on to that final, desperate spark of defiance, that defiant echo of Elara's smile, long enough to deliver one final devastating blow. The air in the Indomitable's bridge was thick with the stench of burning metal and ozone, the metallic tang of blood clinging to Vance's nostrils. The rhythmic hiss of life support was a fragile counterpoint to the chaotic roar of the ship's dying systems. Chen, a young engineer barely out of his academy, was frantically rerouting power, sparks showering from his hands as he wrestled with overloaded circuits. "Captain, we're losing containment in Section 4. The impact breached the thermal regulators." "Patch it with what we have, Chen," Vance barked, his voice gravelly, his muscles screaming with the strain of bracing himself against the violent shuddering of the hull. He ignored the flashing warnings, the insistent alarms they were just a distraction, a futile attempt to quantify the chaos that had descended upon them. He focused on the tactical display, a swirling maelstrom of crimson and white marking the relentless advance of the Leviathan's forward weaponry. The Void-born dreadnought, a hulking behemoth of iron and reactor shields, was a study in brutal elegance. It wasn't sleek or sophisticated, it was a weapon, a force of nature forged in the heart of a dying world. Its sensors, multifaceted and cold, tracked the Indomitable with chilling precision, cataloging every movement, every energy surge. "Your resistance is der Wunsch, the ire." Quaint, the Leviathan's voice echoed across the comms channel, its synthesized tone devoid of any human inflection. A species obsessed with adaptation, yet fundamentally incapable of understanding true power. You strive for elegance, while we embrace the raw, brutal efficiency of destruction. Vance spat on the deck. We're not here for elegance, you overgrown rock. We're here to survive. The Leviathan responded with a precise, devastating volley. Another blast of hyper-accelerated plasma slammed into the Indomitable, this time targeting the auxiliary drive manifold. The resulting explosion tore through the ship's port side, ripping away entire sections of the hull and scattering debris across the bridge. Chen was thrown against the console, unconscious. "Chen!" Vance roared, scrambling to his aid. The young engineer groaned, stirring slightly. "Chen, report!" "Systems failing," Chen managed, his voice weak. "Navigation, communications, primary life support is cycling at 70%. We're hemorrhaging atmosphere, Captain." Vance assessed the situation with grim efficiency. They were outgunned, outmaneuvered, and rapidly running out of time. But he refused to surrender. He had a mission, a purpose, that transcended the immediate need for survival. "Chen, can you override the inertial dampeners? Shift the ship's center of gravity slightly to the starboard side?" "Attempting. Captain, resistance is severe. The system is locked." "Force it," Vance shouted, unleashing a torrent of commands into the console. He realized, with a sudden horrifying clarity, that this wasn't a battle of ships, it was a battle of wills. The Leviathan wasn't simply trying to destroy the Indomitable, it was trying to break it, to shatter its spirit. Suddenly, a high-pitched whine filled the bridge, followed by a jarring lurch. The ship shuddered violently, throwing Vance to the deck. The inertial dampeners, despite the overwhelming resistance, had yielded. The Leviathan responded with a calculated maneuver, subtly altering its trajectory to bring its main cannon into firing position. "They're trying to pin us!" Chen yelled, frantically attempting to regain control of the damaged systems. Vance rose to his feet, his face grim, his eyes locked onto the Leviathan's massive silhouette looming in the distance. He saw a pattern now, a deliberate, almost sadistic strategy. The Leviathan wasn't just attacking, it was testing them, feeding them increasingly desperate situations, pushing them to the brink, reveling in their despair. "Chen, prepare a localized EMP burst," Vance ordered, his voice calm despite the chaos around him. "Target the Leviathan's primary targeting arrays." "Captain, that's suicide." "Idle, cripple our sensors." "It's, a gamble, Chen. And sometimes, the greatest gambles yield the greatest rewards." Chen hesitated for a moment, then, with a nod, initiated the sequence. A pulse of intense energy erupted from the Indomitable's secondary weapons systems, striking the Leviathan squarely in the center of its targeting arrays. The dreadnoughts' sensors flickered, momentarily blinded. The barrage of plasma attacks ceased. In the brief moment of disorientation, Vance seized the opportunity. "Helm, full reverse. Maximum thrust." The Leviathan, momentarily vulnerable, faltered. The Indomitable, despite its crippled state, surged forward, accelerating towards the enemy dreadnought with terrifying speed. "Bearing 187. Closing range," Chen shouted, his fingers dancing across the controls. Vance gripped the firing control, his hand steady. He visualized his daughter, Ilara, her bright smile a beacon in the encroaching darkness. "Remember this, Ilara," he whispered, his voice filled with a fierce, unwavering resolve. "Remember that we fought. Remember that we refused to be consumed." He squeezed the trigger. The Indomitable unleashed a devastating volley of railgun rounds, each projectile a searing spear of solidified energy. The rounds slammed into the Leviathan's hull with the force of a collapsing star, ripping through armor plating and detonating with explosive violence. The Leviathan's response was immediate. A swarm of smaller, heavily armored drones launched a furious assault against the Indomitable, attempting to board the ship and disable it from within. But the human crew, fueled by desperation and a primal instinct for survival, fought back with a savage fury, using salvaged weaponry and improvised tactics to repel the attackers. The battle raged on, a chaotic ballet of destruction and defiance, as the last of the indomitable systems sputtered and failed. But as the burning wreckage of the Leviathan began to drift away, carried by the void, Vance knew one thing they hadn't won, but they had proven that even a broken god could be brought to its knees. The stench of ionized metal and burning coolant hung thick in the Indomitable's ravaged bridge, a grim perfume of survival. The emergency system cycled with a desperate, stuttering rhythm, spitting out diagnostics that painted a bleak picture: 2 breached hull sections, a compromised reactor core venting a steady stream of raw energy, and a crew reduced to a ragged band of 27, most of them nursing burns and fractured bones. Captain Marcus Vance, his left arm encased in a hastily constructed titanium brace, surveyed the scene with a weary, calculating gaze. The flickering holographic displays offered a horrifying tableau: the remains of the Leviathan, a hulking behemoth now adrift in the void, streaked with incandescent scars from the Indomitable's furious assault. "Report," Vance barked, his voice gravelly, a testament to the ear-splitting blasts that had punctuated the last 3 hours. "Reactor core stability at 67, Captain," Lieutenant Chen reported, his face slick with sweat. "We're manually regulating the heat bleed. If we lose another 5%, the auxiliary systems will fail. We'll be operating on emergency reserves." "Acknowledged," Vance said, his jaw tightening. "Damage assessment? Forward section is a lost cause, Captain. Hull integrity is negligible. The engineering team has deployed the emergency sealant, but it's only a temporary fix. We've lost 3 engineers in the salvage." A heavy silence descended, punctuated only by the whine of the failing systems. Vance knew the numbers weren't just statistics; they were the faces of those who had died alongside him, those who had entrusted their lives to his command. The raw, visceral fury head channeled during the initial engagement was fading, replaced by a cold, hard pragmatism. He was a soldier, and soldiers didn't succumb to despair. "Communications are down," the communications officer, Petty Officer Reyes, announced, his voice strained. "The void-born jamming is intense. We've managed to establish a weak encrypted channel to the Daedalus, but they're requesting a full status report. Im prioritizing survival. Dun-dun." Vance nodded grimly. The Daedalus, the Alliance's flagship, was their lifeline, their only hope of extraction. But reaching them meant navigating a field littered with the shattered remnants of the void-born fleet, and, potentially, 1,000 more of their relentless dreadnoughts. Suddenly, a frantic voice cut through the static. "Captain! Scans! We're picking up movement. Multiple targets bearing 234 Mark 7. The tactical displays exploded with a cascade of red icons, each representing a void-born vessel, closing in with terrifying speed. They weren't pursuing the Indomitable; they were converging on the wreckage of the Leviathan. "They're scavenging," Chen shouted, his voice laced with incredulity. "They're stripping the Leviathan for components. It's like they're dissecting it." Vance stared at the holographic representation of the enemy fleet. They weren't engaging in a coordinated offensive. They were simply consuming. Their ships, identical to the Leviathan, moved with a chilling, almost systematic efficiency, sifting through the wreckage with an unnerving patience. Then, a chilling realization struck Vance. The Voidborn weren't just resource-hungry; they were studying them, analyzing their tactics, their weapons, their very construction. The fact that they were dismantling the Leviathan, a flagship of the Alliance, in such a thorough manner suggested a far more sinister purpose than mere acquisition. "All hands brace for boarding," Vance roared, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Prepare for close quarters combat. We're not going to let them learn from our mistakes." The remaining crew sprang into action, securing weapons, deploying defensive measures, and preparing for the inevitable. But Vance knew that this wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a desperate attempt to salvage something, any shred of strategic advantage, before the Voidborn turned their knowledge into a weapon. As the first Voidborn boarding parties breached the Indomitable's hull, a new wave of dread washed over Vance. These weren't the brutal, straightforward warriors depicted in the Alliance intelligence briefings. They moved with a chilling precision, their actions devoid of emotion, their faces hidden behind gleaming metallic masks. They were not seeking to destroy, they were seeking to understand. And Vance knew, with a sickening certainty, that understanding was the deadliest weapon of all. "Report," he bellowed, as a dozen Voidborn warriors swarmed across the bridge, their weapons raised. "Sir, we've identified a pattern," Reyes shouted over the din of combat. "They're not attacking us directly. They're mirroring our movements. They're anticipating our every action." Vance gripped the firing control, his knuckles white. He looked at the chaos surrounding him, at the burning wreckage of his ship, and at the relentless, methodical advance of the enemy. He realized that they weren't fighting a war, they were participating in an experiment. And humanity, on this desolate, forgotten corner of the galaxy, was the unwitting subject. The heavens hadn't shattered, they'd simply revealed a terrifying truth. Some weapons weren't about destruction, but about perfect replication.